I am very delighted to be able to introduce Adam Haverson. He is the Senior Director of People Insights for Danaher Corporation. He is going to talk to us about some of the essentials of setting up data science programs within HR, covering some of the intricacies of building a skilled team, creating a strong data infrastructure, and how to successfully implement data science projects. And also he's going to share some of the challenges that he's encountered along the way and some of the ways in which he has approached those challenges. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce, and one other thing, you also, if you're here tomorrow, Adam is also going to be on a panel tomorrow around cross-disciplinary approaches to people analytics. Very exciting topic, and he's an economist, and he will learn more about that tomorrow if you come. So Adam, take over.
All right, so quick disclaimer before I get started. I'm speaking on my own behalf, not of that of my company. So we're gonna get started with a quick poll, and this is kind of like what you saw with ABCD, but a little bit different. If you can take a look, and do I have to go forward one to scan? No. If you can take a quick look, and I need to go back. There we go. Self-assess your organization on a scale from 1 to 5 with where you feel that your capabilities are. Give you 1 second before. Can you guys take over and start showing results? There we go. All right, so we've got mid to high. Only mid and high. I'll wait for a couple more to come in. There we go. That's more like what I thought. So a pretty crazily flat distribution there. I'm actually going to use this to tune a little bit what I speak over too. So I actually want to see this. I'm not going to click through it. It's worth taking a little time. All right, so we got a really good peak there on mid. So some decent reporting capability, but not a lot of data science work happening. All right. So can I get there we go. Building and scaling a data science team. So I've done this recently, and I've done it before with other companies, and I've consulted for other companies. I've worked for 5 Fortune 500 companies and seen this done in different contexts. So one thing I can say is that org structure is incredibly, incredibly important, because when you try to get a real data scientist coming in, most of them don't have HR background, and it's really hard to have a career path, even in a large organization for them. So having the org design matrix so that they can network well and potentially move through the organization and providing that career growth is really, really important, because otherwise you're gonna recruit them and then lose them. Career paths are incredibly important to consider when you're doing org design. And in my experience, most org design work in data analytics, in people analytics, doesn't consider that, but it becomes a huge headache later on. Another thing, organizational constraints, you need to consider where people are gonna be. You need to look at if you have an organizational directive to work out of an office, that's probably not gonna work. It's a really competitive marketplace too. And then the next caveat is that about 10 years ago, data science got really popular. And there was an explosion of programs. Like everywhere has certificates, everywhere has programs. And even at this point, even a lot of people who get out with like an MS in data science can't really do science. They know how to take a tool and apply the tool. And they don't necessarily know what assumptions that tool requires, and they have a really hard time understanding causality, and that creates credibility problems when you start to churn out results that don't make any sense to the business. The business understands their business. They look at that result and they say, that's garbage, it makes no sense, and you lose credibility. So when you're interviewing someone, I see a lot of people nodding in the audience. When you're interviewing someone, think more about their creativity and their ability to operate as a scientist with good communication skills. You're never gonna find the perfect person who's got deep HR knowledge and they're a brilliant data scientist and they're creative and they have great presentation skills. Doesn't exist. Maybe there's 3 people in the world that are probably at this conference. So what that means is that you have to focus on the core skills, the ones that you absolutely need, and allow for the fact that you're going to need to find them in more than one person. So find a great analyst, a great business partner who can communicate with the data scientist but isn't a data scientist. And find a great data scientist who's creative and brilliant and can do great work, and team them together. That'll make them more engaged, they'll do good work, and it's sustainable as practice. Finally, I think getting the team access to a good literature library is really important. This isn't something we talk about much, but when you kick off a new project, if it's not something you've done before, if you haven't operationalized it, it's really good to do a literature review. There's a lot of good academic work. Academics don't tend to have good data sets, but they have good methodologies, and they know how to apply those methodologies, and they've thought through how to correct for the problems that come up in the real world. So letting your data scientists be able to go through a robust literature review first in a new project, it's great for credibility too, because then when they're presenting, they can say, these are the 3 great papers we found on it. Here's the problems that they found and the approaches that they took. By the way, I don't mind quick questions during the presentation. If there's big meaty discussions, we can wait and do that at the end, but if anyone has a quick comment, feel free to jump in. Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking more like the big publishers that have, when you're at university, your university has access to 3 literature libraries. A subscription to that, it's not cheap, but it gets them access to all the journals they need where this stuff tends to be published. That's a perfect example of a great question to ask during the presentation. No, I'm an economist, I'm an inactive accountant, and I have a chartered financial analyst certification. So data cleaning and preparation, you've heard most of this before, so I'm going to speed through this one. I've repeated 80-20 effort on staging versus modeling is real 3 times, not an accident, it's because it's the first, second, and third rule of Fight Club. Moving and decommissioning data the right way, IT is your friend, really important. Invest in your relationship with IT. Even if it's painful, even if you hate what they tell you in the beginning, build a relationship, do things the right way, get them to trust you because you're trustworthy and they're trustworthy, and then they'll give you some rope when you need to rope. And they can help too. Data being secure in motion and at rest and removed and definitely removed and definitely removed when it needs to be is important. This kind of stuff is sensitive. If it gets out, it damages the company. And if you're in a big company, it gets in the news, and we don't want that. So bring them in as your partner. They want to be more networked into the business, and for them, we're part of the business, and it's critical to have a good relationship there. Anonymize and pseudo-anonymize wherever you can. This is something, it's like a hygiene thing, but we can do better with it. Most data science projects don't require that the model is operating at the knowing who the individual is level. If you've got 20 or 30 variables that don't require identifying the person, get rid of their name, get rid of their birth date, get rid of their email address, just bring in what you need, and then that makes the data set less sensitive as well. So also just look-forward bias is a killer in this space. There are a lot of events that we like to bring into a model that can potentially create look-forward bias in the model. Like someone leaving the company, when someone leaves the company, but they can't be purged until sometime they get moved to a different manager. That kind of event makes it look like a manager change happened to a model, and that can create a false result. So think really carefully about events, and don't make sure you unwind any look-forward biases in your events. Also, especially if you're working on a logistics regression or a model like that you need to scale your variables. If you've got 50 values that can be in a variable, think about bringing it down to 2 or 3, just map it. You can always interpret that later, but having too many categories in the variable can create other types of problems with the model. So try to reduce the possibilities with inside a variable. That can help a lot with the predictive power of results. Pretty much done on that one. So anyone has some questions?
You found to be, thank you. Are there any variables on the scale side in particular that you found to be particularly noisy when you have n number versus 3?
Yeah, I would say if you have a really detailed performance rating, like say your performance rating scales from 1 to 6, but it can be like 1.3. That means you could have like 61 values inside of that. But really, when you look at the data, it only matters if you were like below or meets or above. And maybe you think like really above, like far exceeds is important. But when you look at that, it's only like 0.3% of your population. Who cares? You're not going to get anything out of that anyway. So just classify it into a much smaller group. There's other places where that happens. I would say it happens with like salary and position and range as well. That's continuous maybe, so it's a little bit different, but you can still squeeze more out some kinds of models if you categorize that instead of like letting it be a continuous variable. By the way, every picture in this was created by Midjourney in the background. And like I kind of left it as a little Easter egg, but there's a couple little circles around like really weird stuff that it did. Like I'm gonna go back and see her. She's got like 2 right hands. All right. So when you're designing and executing a project, I have a little kind of funny joke there. You're going to regret it if you don't have the right sponsorship, if you don't have the right business value, if you don't know how you're going to action on it. Pause the project. Don't kick it off until you know what are the possible outcomes, what could it say, and based on what it says, like what are we going to do? How are we going to act on that? There's so many projects that sound like a great idea that even have a sponsor, but when you're done, even if you have some findings, people start to struggle to decide what to do with it. Like I was just talking to one of the vendors out here before about like predicting turnover. Like let's say you have a category of people that are 10% likely to turn, like a big group, right? And you do this big data science project and hey, I can determine that like this subset of that group is 18% likely to turn, not 10% likely to turn. What do you do with that? 18% isn't 90%. It's not like you can like really go after them with some intervention. So how are you going to use the data that comes out? You need a thesis statement. You need buy-in from whoever is going to use the results. And if that's different from the sponsor, then talk to them too. You need legal and privacy to agree. Projects go off the rails all the time because something you think should be no problem, someone won't let go of the data. Who can see the results and how? Make sure you think about that up front. How sensitive is it? And we talked about it a little before. How are you going to store the data? Not just what tools, but like how are you going to move it? And how long are you going to keep the copy? And when are you going to delete it? And how do you audit that it was deleted? Having some standard work around decommissioning any data that was collected or created for a data science project, it's really important. Don't hoard it. It can take so much work, that 80-20 thing, to get the data set together that practitioners have a tendency to want to like keep it once we've got it. Because like, what if I need it again? What if they ask? But if you document how you build it correctly, it's really easy to recreate it. Keep that as a recipe. Be disciplined about building that recipe up and then just get rid of the data and document that it was removed. And then if you need to recreate it next year, you're going to have to do it anyway because it's not fresh. About tools, I'm a little bit agnostic on this. I mean, I would say follow more, Python and R are really common. Some people use SAS, but it doesn't really matter. And if someone's working locally on their machine, if you've got a data science team working on a company-owned machine, then you should be tool agnostic. It doesn't matter. Whatever the practitioner wants, that's a way we can be flexible with our data scientists, and it doesn't cost us anything, and there shouldn't be a compliance problem there either. But there's a really big difference between operating locally and using a cloud-based tool. And be really, really, really careful about cloud-based tools. They can be powerful and it can be okay, but sometimes the data that you put in there isn't secured in the way you want it to be. It's used for training by the vendor who's providing the service. You're accepting terms of service that are really putting your career at risk by doing it. So, I would say like be easier in terms of if someone's using a local tool, but be really cautious, like almost to the point of like start with no, for cloud-based tools. And peer results, peer review. Like when your data science is creative work. It's science and it's creative work. And just like writing a beautiful story, you need editors. You need people who have ideas they can share with the primary author. socialize. You create a culture of socialization where even the most senior people want to share their ideas early on and get other ideas and find problems and root them out. Because it's a lot harder to resolve a problem that someone points out after you deliver your results than one that was raised like in the first week. All right, overcoming implementation challenges. So like what causes projects to be delayed or fail? A big one we've kind of touched on a little bit is when the data work starts before approvals are obtained for the project. Approvals can impact what you're allowed to use, and it's bad when you start to use something you're not allowed to, but it's also bad when you're not using it in the way you're allowed to use it. The scope can drift and change because the thesis wasn't clearly defined and accepted by your stakeholder community in the beginning. And as they really start to pay attention, okay, the project started, now I'm paying attention. Oh, why don't you do this instead? Why don't you do that instead? That can mess everything up and make you go back to the drawing board. So I'd almost like treat the thesis and acceptance of the thesis as a formal project step in this space where, if you have 3 key stakeholders, they have to like approve that that is what we're doing and understand that it's going to be very impactful to the project if it changes. We talked about sponsorship and actionability. This next one, when the sponsor's data literacy interferes with understanding. Every situation is different here. Even inside the same company, you have different sponsors who have different levels of knowledge. Sometimes they're really technical, smart people who maybe even had a statistics class, but they don't understand the model you're applying or the nuances of it or what some of the problems are or like why you can't turn it around and make it predictive and it's just explanatory. So there's really no way, there's no magic bullet here, but invest in the education of your sponsors and do it in like a respectful and subtle way so that, give them the tools they need to the greatest degree possible to understand what the results can and can't do. And that means if you're working on a model that has limitations, like you're not asserting that it's predictive, you're just explaining what happened, explain that to them and say, would it be reasonable to use it for some predictive application? Yes, as long as the business environment doesn't change. But it may be completely wrong if unemployment shifts from 4.2% to 9%. It may even be opposite. The reality may be opposite what the model says. So just invest in that time. Have a two-way conversation and encourage them to come to you to learn and serve as educator for them. Better sponsors lead to better projects. Getting the data science team access to data and technology. We can't really flex on the cloud side there. Like AI is a great example now. You can go out now and get access to a cloud-based model that has a 1 million token context window. And it can categorize things like really, really powerfully. But unless your company stood up a private instance of that model, everything you dump into it's getting used for training that model. And you're probably not allowed to do that from a compliance perspective inside your own company. So, clear the way on the tools, but partner really closely with like legal, privacy, and IT compliance to make sure that you're not disclosing something. And know the limitations of the tools too. Like, I'm guessing other people see this too, but there's a little bit of whack-a-mole with like non-technical HR folks wanting to jump into LLM because it can do some things that seem really powerful but if you really measure what it's doing, like sometimes it's making all kinds of mistakes. It's dreaming data and it sounds reasonable when you look at what it said. When you go back, it actually doesn't relate to the data you fed into it in many cases. So, know the tool's capabilities. And finally, your project may require skills that the team doesn't have. That can be okay. If you've got like a good team and they want to work on a new model they don't have experience with, it can be fine. But allow time to invest in them learning that, because using a new type of model comes with new pitfalls, and there's always a learning curve there. So, tread carefully if it's something you don't know how to do. All right, leveraging AI and data science. So we kind of got ahead of ourselves on the last slide a little bit, but AI is one of those terms that's used it's a catch-all now, like analytics. It doesn't mean anything. It's used to mean everything. Deep learning is like a kind of neural network. Machine learning is a catch-all now too. It doesn't mean anything. And then structured statistics, that means something. That means something. When I do a logistics regression, if I tell you that, you know exactly what I'm doing. But invest in education there too. If you hear someone say, we need to do more AI, talk to them about what they mean by that. Does it mean like they want more data science work done? Or does it mean they want adoption of LLMs? Exactly what do they mean? Deep learning models are the ones you've heard about, ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, Mistral. They're really, really good at categorizing and structuring if you're inside the context window, but they don't tell you when you've slid past the context window. And what the context window is if you take like all the data, all the query data, the input data, and all the output data, it's almost like short-term memory of an LLM. All of that together is how much they can hold in the model at the same time. So when you ask a follow-up question, it can contextualize everything that's in that group. But models that you're accessing on the cloud vary between like 2,000 tokens, which is like 1,600 words, and 1 million tokens now. And what happens if you start to slide past the context window, the results get like really jumbled up and meaningless. So, that can really impact even things they're good at, they start to do very poorly at. They're really good at code assist. If you haven't played around with using like Claude, especially for code assist, it's amazing. And it doesn't have to be like Python code you're writing. That Excel formula that you took like 20 minutes troubleshooting, you can literally just tell it and it'll give you like a formula that's like, beautiful and long and works. So play with it, because I think that's like one of the best applications of LLM right now is code assist. And if you look at like elite developers, like E6, E7 developers at like FANG companies, they're all using this. Like they're all using it now. The LLMs are really bad at modeling and they're really bad at finding causality, but they'll still tell you they're doing it. So like, that's the thing. It's as the application of an LLM in language, it predicts what should come next. So, it'll still give you a prediction even if it's wrong. But there's a lot of like really state-of-the-art stuff happening with RAG and mixture of experts and chain of thought. Chain of thought, especially in the last couple of weeks. ChatGPT 01 is part of what makes it so powerful is structured chain of thought. Where it was noticed like really early on that if you ask a question to an LLM and get an answer that's bad, but then you ask the same question, you say like, think carefully before you answer, you get a better answer. And the reason is that when you do that, it causes more structure to happen in the flow of the result. And that's actually like been brought into the models now so that they create their own chain of thought based on the question. Part of why it's taking longer to answer now is that like there's more structured chain of thought happening. And then finally, there are unresolved legal issues. And depending on the governance and the size of the company you work for, you may not care about this at all, or you may care a lot about it, but whatever the stance is, whatever legal's stance is inside your org, you need to like partner with them and talk to them. There's usually some flexibility. If they've thought about it, it helps when you educate them. Like they need experts. And but they're also thinking through, can I get sued if I use a model that trained on data that they didn't have a right to train on? All right, we've got 10 minutes left. I want to go through like a quick few notes on here, and then I have a little blooper slide, and then we have time for questions. So first, I said in the beginning, this is my perspective only, not my employer's. All the images were from Midjourney. If you haven't played with it, I highly suggest using it. I have 3 YouTube content creators here that I would suggest following. Andrei Karpathy is like a giant in the field. He's been all over the place, and he has some like really detailed technical, like he has an 8-hour like build GPT-2 session on YouTube. You can follow along and build GPT-2 on your own computer from the beginning, from nothing up to it works. And it's excellent. Lev Selector is like an academic, and he has a weekly update on everything that's new in AI. It's not technical, but it's like a technical overview of like what's new in AI, but it's awesome, it's fast, it's like 10 or 15 minutes. And then Tina Huang is a little bit edgy. Like she's a little bit edgy, but she does some interesting stuff, especially around how AI is used for career building. So those are all good sources to follow. And I'm not affiliated with any of them. It's just those are the folks I follow that I've kind of come down to. All right, so quick bloopers. I wanted to, like 3 of the pictures I didn't use in the presentation. The top one, I wanted it to show a mouse cursor. So I mentioned a mouse cursor in the prompt. And if you look at the guy in the front, he's like, his hand is like this. It's like the way your hand looks if you're holding a mouse, which is kind of funny. The next one, you can see the mop goes right through the bucket. The problem it has with hands and like when you look at pets, like legs like going through each other, it has a really hard time with that because in the training data, it's really complicated how physical objects like line up with each other, and it just doesn't work great for that. And then the last one, AI systems are really weird about intellectual property. I don't know if you can see it big enough maybe when you download it, but the middle laptop like generalized the Apple logo into just a circle. The one on the left actually has the Apple logo, and the one on the right is a picture of an actual apple. So it tries to put, like they build safeguards in to try to protect how they display intellectual property, but it's very, very complicated to do that. All right, that's all I have, so let's move on to any questions.
Earlier when you were talking about talent and sort of the folks that have data science certifications that can perform the function of data science but are not actually doing science. What are some of the sort of, whether it's an educational background or whether it's a professional background, what are some of the experiences that folks have had on your team that you've seen be successful and vice versa?
I think that, let's think about that on the interview side. Like if say you're hiring a data scientist, like what should you look out for if you want to hire someone who's capable of not just using the tools, but doing the science? If you're a company where people are gonna try to like go to Glassdoor and look at the details of prior interviews, invest in creating new cases each cycle when you have to hire someone new, and come up with a question where someone can show their creativity in the answer. It's less important, much less important, that someone knows off the top of their head every detail you would need to do random forest. It's much more important that they can think through like, what could go wrong if I told you to use random forest in this situation? If they can answer that question, it's easy to write the case and you get like an insight into the value they're gonna add to the organization. I would almost like ignore the educational background that they have. It's kind of okay to say you want someone with a data science degree. I can understand why that is a valid hurdle, but don't treat that as a gate that automatically qualifies them to do the work, and favor someone who's creative and went to like a less prestigious program over someone who's went to a great program and isn't creative, because creativity is like the defining metric of value added by a data scientist.
Two questions. One being, if I wanted to hire a data scientist, but I do not have a career path for them, should I rent the data scientist? And then the second part to that is, how transferable is data science skill in all the domains, especially from an HR perspective?
Mm-hmm. I think so a few questions there, like rent versus buy. It depends on the person. It depends on the person. If you go through a hiring to test the market and you find someone that you think is in a place where they just want stability, that could be fine to hire them. But it's almost like individual specific. If you've got someone who's like, I just got out of a great program, I'm ready, I want to advance my career very quickly, and you know you can't do that, if that's all you're seeing in the market, then you probably should just rent. And if you rent, my perspective on this, like just because you go to a vendor doesn't mean you're going to get stability. And stability can really matter in your subject matter expertise. If it does, and you need that stability, it's better to work with like basically someone who's a sole proprietor, because then you have stability, because they're making enough that's their business and they're making enough money that they'll stay with you. And I've seen like many big companies in certain areas, especially in like HRS and ERP development, like the technical folks, work with really small shops for that exact reason. You can get stability for 20 years, And so like either hire someone who doesn't mind being in that role for a long time, or go to like a smaller entity that, you can get stability from. But there's so much turnover amongst the vendors that provide data science capabilities. If you just need someone to sit in a seat for 6 months, that's fine. But if you need them to hang around and build on something, you probably won't get that just because it's a vendor. That might have been only one part of your question. What was the other part?
The second part is really around, okay, I rent or I this generic data scientist. How much expertise can I expect is transferable between our domain?
So I think the answer to that in the past is that it's not. But the answer to that in the future is that it is. If it was 10 years ago, that person wouldn't have had any movement within the company probably. But now there's so much like hunger and appetite, especially around disruptive AI applications for most of our businesses, that someone who comes in and learns that and learns the company and learns the HR data is going to have tremendous future opportunities that don't exist today, but that will probably exist in a year or 2 years.
When you're thinking of setting up this team, what role have you been able to see with specifically people coming with skills as like business translators who are not purely an HR business partner, but then have a blend of data science and the business partner piece part of it? And hence, how do you balance and how can you balance it with working with partners? It could be an internal partner with a technology team or an external partner piece. I've had some views, but would love to hear your experience on that.
I think like partial data science skills are really dangerous. Like really, really dangerous. If you had like a class or you got a certificate, but you don't really understand the mathematics that are driving the things that you're doing, you get to some really bad advice and really bad results from the work that you're doing. So I'm kind of more a fan of like, think of them as really separate skills. Someone's a great analyst or business partner, or they're a great data scientist who has creative capability. If there's a unicorn sometimes who can do both, but it pretty much doesn't exist, right? So like, because those roles are so distinct and so few of these are these and vice versa, it's better to just find two great ones and pair them together.
You briefly touched on machine learning and turnover. So I just kind of wanted to get your opinion. Do you feel like machine learning could do a better job at predicting turnover compared to like a regression?
Machine learning, I mean, part of the problem with any data science work in our field is that the regime of reality shifts due to macroeconomic conditions. So like anything you have to train or any data set that you pull that has a date as of this date, it's only gonna work if like 3 months later when you're getting the results, the world is the same. So it's less a question of like, is a regression or machine learning better? It's more a question of building robustness in detecting regime shifts in the now versus the training side.
Over there.
How are we doing on time?
Yeah.
We're done. How you want to keep going? He said we're done on time. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Nikunj Patel. I'm from Pfizer. Just one question. On what's your take on domain knowledge specifically, right? Not just for data scientists, but data engineers, architects. Sometimes what happens is pure technology people, they treat as cookie cutter engineers or data engineers or data architects, right? But then when it comes to HR domain, in my mind, it's very critical to have that business process and domain knowledge. You can't just put a marketing person and have them understand that HR person went through for entire life, right?
Yeah.
What's your take on that? I mean, that's my take. I want to understand like from you and others.
I tend to agree. I mean, it's the team thing. It takes a few years to pick up something deeply, even if you're smart and really want to learn it. So that technical person can become an expert after a few years. But if they're not, a team, like make sure that the sum of the team's skills covers all of the critical things to execute. And the team together can do it, and they work, and they're integrated, and they respect each other. You'll get good work. So I worry less about can each person do everything and more about can the team do everything.
Thank you.
All right?